look, at the end of all of that, what you're still left with is that they do not want our troops in the Arabian Peninsula. They do not want our bases in Saudi Arabia. And it's a fair enough question, even if you're going to say it's some combination of the two, to say, well, why exactly do we need to have those bases there? Why is that? Is that worth the price of dealing with this terrorism issue? And you know, even if Saudi Arabia was concerned that Saddam Hussein was going to invade the country, are there other ways that we could give Saudi Arabia some security guarantees? Are there other ways? Do we really need to be slaughtering Iraqis in a non-war period? So again, look, and by the way, it's not just the military bases. There's a long list of grievances that they have.
So, like, again, the question of what benefit does America gain from having military bases in some location, I think is a completely fair question, and a logical question, and a rational question. And it could be hard to quantify because I said a lot of it's influence, a lot of it's just America benefits from having outposts that it can project military force all over the world so that it can influence other countries with both soft power and the threat of hard power. And it's the problem. I guess the problem with sort of all the framing of that is like it's incredibly difficult to quantify in a number. Like you can quantify how much it costs. It's very difficult to quantify the benefit gained from that because the only way to really measure is like, we're like, well, hypothetically, what does the world look like if we didn't have that? And obviously it's a hypothetical. So who heck knows what the world will look like without all that. So
it'd be a mess, be a total mess.
I think so. But so even though it's like a completely fair question, it's an incredibly difficult question to answer. And I'm sure there's some people that have answered this question and blah, blah, blah. But you always get into this trouble that when you have these like very difficult to answer questions, you're going to have enough gray area that people can just lean in whatever direction they want to lean in. You know, so if our intuitions are more like pro America, having influence around the world, it's easier for us to lean on that research or that, you know, study that says that. And if you're very America isolationist, I'm sure there's going to be a research or arguments that you can just lean on in that direction too, because it's such a gray area. And that's kind of what's kind of annoying about the conversation, I feel like, from Dave's perspective, which is that I don't believe that Dave Smith arrived at this conclusion because he's like, well, I looked at a bunch of information completely independent of my priors or my moral intuitions about America being bad, and decided that we should listen to terrorists, okay, that America should give into the demands of terrorists and say, hey, even if local governments want us in this region, even if it benefits us in some tangible way through oil prices or military projecting power, we should just listen to the terrorist demands and do what they say. Like, that's not something, I don't believe for a second that Dave Smith arrived at that from some sort of logical basis. It's more like, no, he just doesn't want us to be there for what he just has this emotion of America should just not be anywhere. And so if the terrorists give an excuse, then that's the excuse he's basically going to accept in order to justify the preconceived feeling.
Yeah, he doesn't want the American government to do anything. Yes. Nothing. Anything the federal government does is bad in his eyes.
Yes. Because if this was something, I would argue, if this is something based on a logic argument and not just like, oh, America bad argument or a moral intuition argument, you would expect that the person would say, well, every situation in the world is going to be different, right? And so you'd expect, well, that would mean that if you're just using pure logic and pure facts, you'd be like, okay, well, America should be here in these circumstances, in these situations, and America shouldn't be here in these circumstances, in these situations, because every tiny situation is going to be a little bit different. So you'd have to go through each individual one. If someone has the argument or the worldview that America should be projecting its military in all situations at all times, then that person's obviously just biased, because you're like, well, that's impossible. It's impossible that America should always be in that position. And the same thing is true on the flip side of that. If your argument is, or your worldview is, America should never, ever be in any country for any reason projecting any military power, then it's the same thing. It's like, well, you're not operating under some sort of logical argument. You're just being biased at that point.
Yeah. Whenever I say this about libertarians, I always point, no, they want the night watchman state. They want the government to be able to prevent crime and stuff like that. They want a police force. So I don't want to straw man the libertarians.
Well, it's generally police force domestically. There's always an intuition against any sort of foreign involvement whatsoever. And as I said, I understand there is part of the intuition that is completely valid, which is if we are spending our money, we should be gaining something from that. And if it's just going to help strengthen a corrupt government or help strengthen a corrupt business, then we should not be engaged in that action.
Which I've been convinced all foreign aid is kind of that problem. We're giving money to some elite who often is oppressing or repressing their population. So
right.
That are completely incoherent and just not justified. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the element of it's the element of American domination over the region that I think is pretty predictably going to lead to resistance.
So a few things.
Notice the word domination. I keep saying this. It's going to sink in sooner or later for people. Libertarians use the same exact oppressor-oppressed lens on the world that progressives use. The only difference is the libertarians have a different oppressor in place. The libertarians always think it's the government. And the progressives always think it's the rich or the business or industry or corporations.
Right.
But they still have the exact same lens. They just use a different oppressor. So I don't think that's a great lens. I mean, obviously there are times in history when that lens was useful, right? Slavery, right? Seems obvious that was an oppressor-oppressed situation. So
it seems like there's very few people, and maybe this is like impossible, and maybe it's just unreasonable to expect there to be a society of like perfectly morally, intuitively balanced people that can perceive things from all different angles. Like that's not the way humans seem to be structured. That's not the way that human society seems to be structured. It seems like you have people that are sort of to the left, people that are sort of to the right, people that are libertarian, people that are more authoritarian, and they kind of all like pull the country in various directions. And sometimes, and well, I think always, you need people pulling the country in all those various directions at all times, because that's what creates the balance. It's sort of like the pulling between all these different factions, and then they have to compromise. And what they're going to have to compromise is going to be a more moderate position than any of those people, any of those groups would necessarily feel comfortable existing under. And in my mind, part of what made America, and still does make America, the richest, strongest country, is that America was very strange in that it was like the first country that was really founded, I think, on a more libertarian leaning value system than any other country before then.
That's unusual.
Right. And because at that point in human history, it was like almost every country was founded on a more authoritarian, a monarchy system or something to that effect, or an empire or something to that effect. And America was really one of the first countries that's like, no, this is like this libertarian principle of, self-governance and individual rights and freedoms and all these other things. So, like me and Adam are be doing a lot of libertarian bashing probably today. It's really not like libertarian bad. It's that this extreme version of libertarianism that I think Dave Smith he's on the so far libertarian camp that he doesn't like democracy as a concept. Yeah. Where that, and the problem is, I don't know if there's really like a word for that, because it feels wrong, I think, to call Dave Smith a libertarian, because he's not really. Like if you were to take every libertarian in America, Dave Smith would be like the very extreme version of it. Like he would not be in the average libertarian worldview, I don't think.
Right. I mean, I like democracy for the same reason I like capitalism, but everyone always disagrees that democracy is a kind of market. They're like, well, it's a market that you are forced to participate in. Well, yeah. I mean, so's food, right? That's a market you're forced to participate in. So, so is healthcare. That's a market you're forced to participate in. So, On the compromise thing, in addition to compromise, there's also this giant shifting environment around us. So the libertarians might not be needed in a certain environment, but then the environment changes, and all of a sudden everyone is getting massively oppressed by the government,
Yes.
right? A fascist regime has taken over. So then all of a sudden their ideas are not radical. They're totally needed and necessary.
Yes,
So
exactly. Yeah.
a lot of times people, I mean, right now, a big problem is we have such wide, varied perceptions of what our environment is right now. We used to have a media that really oriented everyone kind of on the same page. So we knew during the Cold War that we were in this struggle against Russia, which they may have a political economic system that could rival the United States and even displace the United States. And everyone kind of believed that because the media sold that narrative continually. Now we have such a fractured media that they're not really able to establish any sort of norm. So just determining what that environment is difficult. Like, obviously we have a lot of people, these kids are all anti-fascist because they think we're living in fascism right now. So
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a difficult trade-off because it's like, yeah, back in the day, media was more aligned. The benefit of that is that there was a more shared worldview. The con of that is that if that worldview that we're
Isn't
being
accurate,
sold
yeah.
is inaccurate, right? It's more difficult to adjust accordingly, or easier to manipulate the population into doing, X, Y, Z. And then now we're living in like the polar opposite world where everything is completely fractured. There's so many different narratives that are being pumped out at all times that people can essentially just pick and choose whatever narrative that they feel comfortable with. And thus there's literally not literally, but there's no great unifying view of the world in America at all.
Yeah.
And then we can't really galvanize or orient, I should say. We can't really orient ourselves as a country along like what are the goals that we're trying to accomplish and how exactly do we accomplish those goals?
Tough times.
Yeah. I think I'm going to, so as I said, I don't like calling Dave Smith a libertarian because I don't think he is. I think I'm going to refer to him as a radical. And I think he refers to himself in this conversation as a radical too.
Oh, well, then it's totally fair.
Yeah.
I'm going to refer to him as Longface.
Okay.
Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch Adam show. Most of the time we stream Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, and we stream during the week. Come join us. You guys are going to love it. It'll be great.